My name is Jack Robinson, and I'd like to tell you some things this morning about the life of Henry Parsons Crowell. When I was a kid, uh, I used to get up in the morning and wander down to the kitchen to see what Mom was cooking for breakfast. And often she had a pot boiling on the stove with Quaker Oats oatmeal in it. I didn't think that was the greatest breakfast I could imagine, but when she let me put some brown sugar and milk on it, it wasn't too bad. At that time, I didn't realize that the reason I could be eating Quaker Oats was because of a man named Henry Parsons Crowell. I had no idea that this man was actually a dedicated Christian. And I had no idea that when he was in his 70s, in the 1920s, he created a foundation, a charitable foundation with his earnings from Quaker Oats that actually made grants of millions of dollars over the years to Christian missionaries and organizations of Christian higher education. I've had the privilege of serving as a trustee on that foundation for 40 years. And so I've had a chance to read a lot about Mr. Crowell, get to know him a bit, though I never knew him personally. And I'd like to share with you some of the observations I've made about his life, and especially about his spiritual journey. There are actually three elements that I have noted that were crucial to Mr. Crowell's life as I see it. And since I'm going to talk about his personal journey, I'm going to refer to him as Harry because that's what his family and close friends called him. I think the first critical element in his life was his encounter with God. Harry was raised in a God-fearing family, and he was not ignorant of the faith of his parents. But the death of his father to tuberculosis when Harry was just 9 years old devastated him. He was sobbing at the end of the graveside ceremony for his father, and after it he asked the pastor, Pastor Hawks, if he could see him the next day. And the next day he and the pastor did meet, and Harry later reported that during that conversation with Dr. Hawks, he had come to see and know and trust in Jesus. And during all the years that followed, Harry said he never desired to depart from the Lord, from Jesus. This important moment in Harry's life was deepened when 9 years later, at age 18, he was diagnosed with tuberculosis, just as his father had been. And it was about the same time that the famous evangelist Dwight L. Moody came to speak in his church. He wasn't quite so famous at that point in time, but he made a huge impact on Harry. And listening to Moody, Harry took another step in his commitment to God. During that meeting with D.L. Moody, he prayed to God saying this: "If you will allow me to make money to be used in your service, I will keep my name out of it so that you will have all the glory." And Harry hoped that this promise would shape the rest of his life, and it actually did. The second element, I believe, that was crucial in Harry's life was his encounter with the Scriptures. A year after hearing D.L. Moody's talk in his church, Harry's health deteriorated further, to the point that his doctor said to him he would have to live out of doors for the next 7 years or he would die. By then, Harry had begun studying the Bible, and he came across an obscure verse in Job chapter 5 that says, "From 6 calamities he will rescue you. In 7, no harm will touch you. And in the light of that text, Harry concluded that God was responding to his need through the doctor's orders, and that in 7 years out of doors, God would heal him. Well, regardless of how shaky his method of biblical interpretation might have been, 19-year-old Harry was taking the Bible seriously and trying to act upon his teaching as he saw it. And after 7 years out of doors, Harry actually was healed. But his biblical and theological understanding didn't really mature for another 20 years, until he was about 41 years old. By then, he had married Susan Coleman and moved from Cleveland to Chicago. And there, his wife, Susan, met the wife of William R. Newell, who was the academic superintendent of Moody Bible Institute. They both went to the same church. And so Harry and Susan decided to invite Dr. Newell to conduct weekly Bible studies in their home for themselves and some of their friends. He started right out with the book of Romans. And those Bible studies not only transformed Susan's life, who up until then was really a nominal Christian, they were also so transformative in the life of Harry that in his interviews with his biographer shortly before his death, Harry said repeatedly, "I owe more to William R. Newell than to any other man." The third element that I think was crucial in Harry's life was his pattern of personal devotion and Bible study and prayer. He maintained his encounter with God and the Scriptures on a daily basis. I think the most dramatic biblical example of this was in the life of the prophet Daniel during the years he served under Darius, the great pagan king of Babylon. When Daniel's jealous enemies wanted to eliminate him, they got the king to sign a decree that anyone who prayed to any god or human being except the king for the next 30 days would be thrown into the lion's den. And in Daniel chapter 6, we read, when Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house, where he had windows in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before God as he had done previously. In other words, he didn't let the king's decree dissuade him from maintaining his daily encounter with God. We all know how the story ends. Daniel spent the night with the lions, untouched by them. When King Darius found Daniel alive the next morning, he was ecstatic. Daniel was pulled out of the den, and his enemies were tossed in. The chapter ends by saying Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and Cyrus, who followed. The story of Daniel and his false accusers reminds me of the text in Proverbs 28 that says, "Whoever walks in integrity will be delivered, but he who is crooked in his ways will suddenly fall." And that certainly proved true in Daniel's life. Daily prayer 3 times a day was Daniel's pattern for maintaining his relationship with God. Harry also knew the importance of a disciplined devotional pattern in his own life. The last year of his life, at age 89, when he was still board chairman of Moody Bible Institute, where he'd been in that role for 40 years, Harry wanted to speak to MBI's graduating students in 1944. And here is what he said to them. It was a warning. He said, "Before receiving your diplomas as members of the graduating class, some of you may think, perhaps all of you, that no word of caution is needed because your love for the Bible is so great and your prayer hours so sacred and so delightful. If this thought is in your mind, that it is there simply because you have never measured your strength against the insistent, impelling, and compelling power of steadily accumulating activities. The more competent you are, the stronger will be the temptation to take time for these activities that belongs to your devotion. Something must be given up. Reluctantly and slowly, you lessen the time set aside for devotions. Then comes the curtailment of spiritual power. I plead with you, remember this last word of warning from the Institute. Refuse to lessen the devotional period, no matter how severe the pressure. I believe these elements in Harry's life were essential to his spiritual well-being, but they also enabled God to be manifested through him to others. Again, we see that Daniel's life, too, we see that same thing: encounter with God, encounter with the Scriptures, a disciplined devotional life. These three foundations of Harry's life are arguably important for any follower of Jesus. But they don't just benefit us. They also have the potential of transforming our lives so that God can reveal himself to others through us. The pagan king Darius certainly saw something of God through Daniel, who maintained his disciplined worship. The king was so moved that in Daniel 6 we read, King Darius wrote to all the nations and people of every language in the earth, saying, I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. What did Moody students see of God through Mr. Crowell's warning to the graduates in 1944? We don't really know, but they must have sensed something of God through the talk of this elderly board chairman who took the time to speak with these students. The last insight we have into Harry's devotional life occurred on the day he died, at age 89. On October 23, 1944, Harry left his office at Moody Bible Institute. He walked to the train station and boarded a commuter train for his home in Winnetka. The train started out of the station, but then stopped. Someone had seen this elderly man slump over in his seat. The train officials who came to his seat realized that Harry's spirit had departed, but his little brown New Testament was still open in his lap. This picture of Harry's last moments in this life has left a lasting mark on my life. There's one last note I'd like to add. I have also seen evidence of the transforming power of God through Harry's life in the charitable foundation he created 96 years ago. Through its grants of over $100 million across the years, this foundation has impacted more people after Harry's death than he influenced directly during his lifetime. And that grace of God through Harry's life continues to be expressed through the Crowell Foundation that he established right up until this present day.